Hello, everyone. Um, we are live for this unique stream that I'll be doing for my mother who recently passed away last Thursday at the age of 64. It has been fairly difficult on me and my family, my immediate family, sister also. We all knew that this day was coming for quite some time now, especially considering how bad her health has been. Let's first talk about the good thing about my mother. My mother, we lived out the classic immigrant story. She came to this country from Belgrade, sorry, this country being Canada, in January of 1987. She was 6 months pregnant with my older sister, and my father was with her. They were both carrying 4 pieces of luggage. They had left everything behind, their friends, families, because they believed that they could start a new and promising life in in a different world. They ended up losing half their luggage along the way to customs. When they arrived in Toronto, in the downtown Toronto area, and my dad had found a job as a pizza man while my mother was studying her board exams to become a dentist. And she did not speak a word of English. She had to learn everything from scratch. I'm not pulling a flash gas, Gil. This is serious. There's no joke this time. So they first started living in a small house. And then when I was about a year old, we moved into a condominium close to the city center in Mississauga. And I had lived there for about 11 years. Around 1998, my mom successfully opened her business, her dentistry business, and had worked for about 23 years nonstop. She never let anything stand in her way, and she always wanted to make sure that her family had the best of everything, no matter what the cost was. Unfortunately, part of that cost impacted her health. She always had very bad luck with health, but she never let that stand in her way. She was first diagnosed with polycythemia in 1994 after an anesthetic reaction. She was supposed to have her bunions removed. They removed it. She took anesthesia, and then on her next doctor's visit, she ended up with a very high red blood cell count, and they had diagnosed her with polycythemia. And she had asked like whether it was possible that the anesthetic caused that reaction, and they said that it's very possible. So later on, around 2006, We had moved from the apartment to uh, a new house, which we were living there for already about 3 years, and that's when they found out that she was diagnosed with endometrial cancer, and it was stage 1 at the time. So what they did was to prevent this, to prevent the tumor from getting bigger, they performed a hysterectomy on her, and then they followed up accordingly for 5 to 10 years, and there was no sight of any tumors for cancer growth. However, around 2014, her polycythemia had become myelofibrosis, which is a bone marrow cancer. And basically, that means that the bone marrow has stopped growing new red blood cells, and thus her red blood cells, her platelets, her whole blood count would gradually get smaller and smaller with time. It was around 2021, so about a year and a half ago in May, when everything's just went severely downhill for her. What had happened was around April, both the best thing and the worst thing happened. That's when I received that's when I received an invitation and an email from the hospital in Ireland saying that I had passed the interview and they would gratefully accept me into their program. So what I did was I checked the list to see what they needed in terms of documents, and then I saw that on the checklist that there was a proof of COVID vaccination, and that's when I freaked out because I had known about how bad this certain prerequisite could be for me, and I panicked and I told my mom that I could not go through with this. And that's when she got very, very angry with me, stating that this this opportunity is a gift from God. It's what she has been hoping for ever since she put me into medical school at the age of 17. It was the answer to all her problems, that she no longer had to worry about working hard, and that I would have to take this program even if it meant being vaccinated. From that point on, I felt like my relationship with her was shattered. There were already hard times going on where I felt like I didn't know my mother anymore once she forced me into medical school. I mean, don't get me wrong, she was still there for me when I had my tough times. She always took the opportunity to visit month, so that way I would make my time in the Caribbean worthwhile. And what happened afterwards was for about 6 weeks, I had massive anxiety, palpitations. I felt like I couldn't talk to anyone in my family anymore. And then that's when I decided, under the radar, to run away to Florida. And then once they found out I ran away to Florida, my my dad ended up with probably the worst kind of pain he ever experienced. He had a stress ulcer for 2 months. Took him 2 months for him to get better from that ulcer, and he was having a lot of anxiety and difficulty sleeping for about 6 months. It was that was probably like the biggest amount of pain I've caused them. The way my mother reacted was that she felt like she had failed me and would focus the rest of my life on, getting on herself. Unfortunately, there were worse things that were going to happen to her during this time. During that same time, she had started experiencing a lot of leg pain, right-sided leg pain. We thought it could be gout because she has a history of gout, but it turns out that they ended up doing blood tests on her, and they found that her kidney function had plummeted very badly on the right side. It was 90% gone on her right side. And then they also found some scar tissue in that area which was impacting the kidney. So what she had requested at the time was to do a biopsy, but then they thought, oh no, the scar tissue will go away on its own. And then, but she kept persisting for 3 months. And then 3 months later, sorry, a month later, they did the biopsy and they found out that that scar tissue was actually cancer. And that was actually the same kind of cancer that was affecting her uterus back 15 years ago. So what happened after that was they did the they did the biopsy. It was cancer, and then she requested that they requested that they do radiation or like to take it out. Sorry, she requested that surgery be done, but unfortunately, by that time, the tumor was already in a delicate area in her kidney. It was very difficult to remove the scar tissue because it was surrounded by so many blood vessels. And if they had pulled it out, she would have lost any sensation or motor problems permanently and any blood supply in her right leg. So essentially, it was a catch-22 situation. I mean, she ends up not having any ability to move her leg, and she also ends up with no, and then like with or without the surgery. So what happened after that? The pain started getting worse, and in October, that's when they wanted she opted to see if there were any radiation treatments or specific experimental radiations to do because she couldn't do chemotherapy as she had the bone marrow cancer, and the only other thing they could do was just give her more radiation. So what they did was she got radiation in October because that's when they were back from. That's when the earliest that they could do. But by that time, the tumor just kept growing and growing, and then so they did one course of radiation, and it had shrunk her tumor by about 10%. In December, that's when they did an MRI, and they found out that the tumor had ended up metastasizing to her liver. This was a month after she had to take the vaccine along with my dad. Because what had happened was my dad had found one of those experimental treatment therapy sessions in Cuba, but in order to travel to Cuba at the time, you had to be vaccinated. And then my dad was against vaccines at the time. And he had said that, yeah, unfortunately, if we wanted to go to Cuba, we'd have to get vaccinated. And then my mom just decided to say, okay, then I guess we don't have to go to Cuba. My dad's heart sank so hard. Like it sank so hard that he just felt like he wanted to just take both the vaccines just to save her life. Of course, looking back in hindsight, it ended up being a waste of time. But I can understand why he did that. Those are the kind of things you want to do. Like if you had a loved one, you would do anything for them, even if it means, ending your life. My dad told me that, anyone can say I love you or like, just say it in front of millions of people. But real love is having to, do things for them when they're not able to themselves, or whether they're in like a state of helplessness, being there for them even if they like insult you when they're not in their right mind, or being combative when they're not in their right mind. So then what had happened was they went to Cuba around January, and unfortunately, they said that she was not a candidate for the for the cryo laser. Sorry, it was called the cyberknife radiation. They said she was not a candidate then, and by then the tumor had already spread to her liver, and it affected. There were three tumors inside her liver. Luckily, it was on one side at the time. But then more time passed, and then they tried to see if they could find any other places that would be able to let her do the cyberknife. And they did find a place they did find a doctor in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, who who owns a clinic in Los Cabos, which is in Baja California on the west coast between the borders of California and Mexico. So what they did was they went to Los Cabos, and this was essentially the last resort. It was either do or die at this point. The surgery, they would do 3 sessions of chemotherapy, one on her right leg, one in the liver, and then a final one just to get rid of any leftover cancer tissue that wasn't treated at the time. So they did the 3 sessions. It looked like there was progress going on. The whole therapy itself cost $193,000, which my dad paid out of pocket because we didn't have insurance. So he paid that, and he unfortunately, when they did all that, my dad had told me that she didn't have much time after that, and she wasn't going to last the new year. When they came home from Los Cabos, he called me and asked if I signed up for basic specialist training in Ireland. And during that time, this was around October, I was already in a very difficult, and I had 3 panic attacks in one 24-hour period and collapsed from hypoglycemia. And from that point on, I just couldn't sign up for it because I felt like I wasn't ready, and this was, destroying me from the inside. I sent him a long text telling him how much I felt about this, and then if he were to keep pushing me to go into medicine, that I would have to no longer talk to him again. So he agreed at first, and then that he understood my decision, but then a week later, he called me and then asked me whether I signed up for basic specialist training again, to which I lied and said yes. And from that point on, I felt like I was just talking to a brick wall, so I blocked him. About a few weeks later, I was considering I had unblocked my parents temporarily, and then I saw that there was a phone call from my dad's phone, and then when I picked up the phone, I heard that it was my mother on the phone, just calling my name in the worst pain possible. It looked like she was just crying for help, for anyone that could bear. She called my name, and then I knew that her time would be up eventually. So I ended up booking a plane to back to Canada to see her one last time. I like to read a few passages from what I wrote down in my book. So My thoughts were that when I came back to Canada before going on my flight was that it was not going to be a pleasant trip for several reasons. The number one, of course, having to say goodbye one last time to my dying mother, and the other reasons being related to my family, which I told them that I can't pursue their path to me being a doctor anymore due to chronic anxiety and burnout. It was the final straw for me when I had my 24-hour shift, and that's when I had to quit working for the time being. And since I stopped working there, my anxiety had improved a great deal, and the new place I'm staying was doing wonders for me. And I also knew that a hospital environment is not something that is a good option for me in the long term. Telling my parents this was that I can't continue like this was going to be extremely difficult, but I had to tell them so that way there were no regrets for the rest of my life. I will still tell them that I'm doing medicine, but it's not something that I could specialize or make a career out of this. More like a hobby where I'm working part-time, but not as a full-time thing. I do have a backup option to work as a locum in an occupational health group for visual and audio aid. And luckily, the people who work there are as awake or as red pilled as I. So I think that's going to be a major advantage for me. As well, the hours aren't as demanding and there's no surprises coming my way. So that way I'm able to organize things accordingly. It is a shame, though, that my whole family has become completely delusional and blue pilled regarding the wokey pokey, minus my dad. But it is their choice, and unfortunately, they are going to have to take the hit when things get really bad. There was some hostility that I had towards my sister before my flight because she wanted me to wear a mask as she was afraid that I would get an infection on the flight and I would spread that to my mother. At this point, it was irrelevant whether she got sick because it was not going because regardless of whether I got sick around her or not, her cancer was not going to go away. She did end up actually getting COVID while she was in Los Cabos, and that lasted for about a month. It completely destroyed her immune system, and it also destroyed like her nose was completely stuffed up, and she ended up because she was constantly blowing her nose. It ended up destroying a lot of blood supply in her nose, and she was just constantly getting. One of the only things that's going to so at this point talking about COVID or anything like I had to keep my mouth shut because the last thing I wanted to do was cause any controversy between my relatives, and the only person I could really talk to at this time in full details with no secrets was my god brother. So when I arrived there, I saw my sister, we hugged, and then we ended up going to my mom and dad's place, which is where I would be staying for the next 3 weeks. I was supposed to have stayed 1.5 weeks originally, but during that time, I knew that I had to wait longer because at that time, my mother's health would continuously get worse. My sister had also been suffering some medical conditions as well, especially with some plantar fasciitis since her third trimester, and she was already suffering from Hashimoto's thyroiditis in the meantime. And then in regards to my mom's business, uh,